Good afternoon from the Republic of Nauru, as Nauru is the chair of the working group for corruption. I am Ronald Bay Talasasa Jr., Director of Public Prosecutions for the Republic of Nauru, and I will be chairing this session. I would like to let all participants know that the Zoom host is Martha Piper from the Australian Attorney General's Department, and we also have a graphic designer, Mr. Blake, with us. Ladies and gentlemen, this week, the Pacific Islands Law Officers Network, or PILON for short, is hosting a series of public webinars on the effects of COVID-19 on the three strategic priorities of PILON. One, cybercrime, second, corruption, and the third, sexual and gender-based violence, or SGBV. Today, we will focus on the effects of COVID-19 on corruption in the Pacific. Now, more than ever, our efforts to combat corruption are vital to sustain COVID-19 recovery efforts by preventing the misuse of precious public resources. We know that the easing of compliance, oversight, and accountability safeguards to respond quickly to COVID-19 has created opportunities for corruption to thrive. Today, we will hear from two experts from UNODC who jointly deliver the UN Pacific Regional Anti-Corruption Project on how corruption trends in our region have been affected by COVID-19 and what we can do to reduce these risks. We have a graphic artist joining us today to document our discussion. The images produced will be used in a PILON poster that will also be available on the PILON website after the event. I would like to introduce to you the two panelists and provide a brief overview of their professional bio. The first presenter is Annika Wythes. Annika is the UNODC Regional Anti-Corruption Advisor in the Pacific under the UN Pacific Regional Anti-Corruption Project. She is also the designated UNODC representative in the Pacific. She has been with UNODC working on corruption since March 2009. Prior to joining UNODC, she worked for top-tier law firms in Australia and the Netherlands, as well as brief ICC Arbitration Court and with the Japan Oil, Gas and Metals National Corporation. Annika is a lawyer with a Bachelor of Laws and Bachelor of Economic and Social Sciences from the University of Sydney, and a Master in Public International Law from the University of Leiden, and a Master in Public Policy from the University of Oxford, where she was a public service scholar. The second panelist is Sonia Stefanovska-Trajanoska. Sonia is the UNDP Anti-Corruption Advisor in the Pacific under the UN Pacific Regional Anti-Corruption Project. She is a governance and anti-corruption expert with over 20 years experience in the UN system. Sonia holds a PhD in political science from the Institute for Sociological, Political and Juridical Research at the University of St. Cyril and Methodius in Macedonia. She holds a master's in linguistics and a postgraduate specialization in peace and development. Participants, ladies and gentlemen, we have two very highly qualified, experienced, and skilled panelists to take this session forward. May I ask Annika, please?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your very, very kind words. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, it's an absolute honor to be here today with all of you. And thank you very much to PILON for the wonderful partnership that we have. A special thanks to Martha and to Sase, who have organized all of this. And a big thank you to all of you participants to take the time out of your day to be with Sonia and me as we present to you a little bit about corruption and COVID-19, some insights from the Pacific. We hope to impart a little bit, and we do know that amongst the attendees, there are many wonderful partners of ours. And one expression and one proverb that we love to use is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And this is where partnership is so key. Partnership is not only core to our project, because we have UNODC and UNDP with two donors, the Australian government, DFAT, and the New Zealand aid program. But we also have wonderful partners, not only PILON, but we also have PINA, and we have Piengo, and we have Pringo. And we are partnering more and more with the Australian Public Service Commission, and of course also with New Zealand and the Ombudsman's Office, and so on and so forth. And these are the partnerships that are so rich to us in the Pacific, because if we work and collaborate together, this is when we can really address the issues that are before us. And it may not be us who can address them, but somebody else who can do it much better. I also like to say, because all of us are in so many different places in, around the Pacific, that people often think it is the ocean that divides us. It is actually the ocean that unites us. And I think this is a very strong point, because a lot of the challenges that we may be facing are actually not unique to our context, but can also be around the world and also with our partners, so we can learn from one another. So Sonia and I are going to go through a bit of an overview today. Firstly, we'll look at the International Anti-Corruption Framework, the UN Convention Against Corruption, its review mechanism, the Sustainable Development Goal number 16, under the 2020 Development Agenda. Then we'll quickly look at the regional frameworks that are in place, the Taniwa Vision, Pacific Unity Against Corruption, the Bow Declaration, Pacific Regionalism. And then we'll look at COVID-19, some corruption risks, as well as possible recommendations in order to mitigate some of these risks. Then we'll go into a little bit about UNPRAC and some of the actions that we've taken this year. Now, we also do have Gavin online, who is wonderfully behind the scenes designing everything. So we will flick a little bit back and forth between the presentation and Gavin, but I would like to maybe take the time now to flick back to him, other than to show you this screen where, with the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and let me stop sharing now so I can quickly give it back to Gavin. There we go. This is new to us. I've never been through anything like this before, so forgive my my learning as we go. But the UNCAC, as many of you know it, is the first legally binding global anti-corruption instrument. It really is quite groundbreaking, because at the moment we have 187 states parties. And for us, what is important in the Pacific is that there are 14 Pacific Island countries that are on board. So it really provides us with a framework for what it means going forwards. The first one that came on board was Papua New Guinea in 2007. And the last one that acceded to the convention was Tonga in February. So we have seen there to be a lot of a shift in this time from 2007 to where we are now. But what this framework provides us with is really a holistic approach to adopting prevention enforcement measures. Some are mandatory, meaning mandatory requirements to criminalize corrupt behavior, but also the convention reflects this transnational nature of corruption, providing it to be a legal basis. And this is what lawyers love to know. What's my legal basis for all of this? To enable international cooperation as well as the recovery of proceeds, so asset recovery. And it's being used around the world. In the Pacific, there's been interest in using it as a legal basis. And I hopefully will be seeing a lot more of it as opposed to signing a lot of these bilateral, multilateral agreements, because you have this already. What is important also is the role of not only government in this. We're not talking only about public sector corruption, but it's the private sector. We need to also bring in civil society in really trying to prevent and fight it. One quick thing to mention to all of you, because I know that some of you are engaged in these discussions already, is the special session of the General Assembly against corruption. This is where that Pacific voice is crucial. I know that the president of Kiribati has been very active in ensuring that the Pacific voice is heard. But if I might be able to encourage all of you to also be engaged in this, that would be wonderful, to make sure that we are ensuring that we have that voice on the international stage. Now, UNCAC during COVID. So there are some key articles in the COVID response and also key tools to foster that accountability, that integrity, that transparency in times of crisis. So not to go into detail, but just to raise to you that there are a few, for example, Article 5.3, periodically evaluating legal instruments, administrative measures, really, are they adequate? Are they adaptable to the times? Then we could go to Article 9.2, which really, or 1, which looks at public procurement, 2, that looks at public finances. Then, of course, we have Article 13.1, and that really is that active participation of civil society, of individuals, groups outside of the government. And here what we're talking about is that transparency and promoting the contribution of decision-making, the contribution to the decision-making processes, key during COVID. Also, is there that effective access to information? How are people getting that information at the moment? And we'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. Then Article 10b looks at the transparency of public accountability. So with this review mechanism, what I would like to say about the UN Convention Against Corruption is it has an intergovernmental peer review process. We refer to it as the UNCAC review mechanism. It has been a great tool and entry point in the Pacific for us because it has enabled us to work with governments and with many of you as our focal points have been nominated to really firstly do this self-assessment to understand what is it that we have to take stock. What are our laws, our institutions, and how effective are they? We often like to say you're only as strong as the weakest link on that criminal justice chain. So what does that really mean? In terms of the cycles, because the convention is quite big. So we have the 2 cycles. So one looks at cycle 1, which is prevention. Cycle 1 looks at criminalization, law enforcement, and international cooperation. And cycle 2 looks at prevention and asset recovery. Now, what has come out of this? Because I mentioned that only Tonga's came on board last year. So we have a full mapping of what all the other countries in the Pacific have been doing. And we produced this publication with the information we had at the time. And it's a public document. It's consolidated all the information. And you're very welcome to actually have a look at it. It's called Criminalization and Law Enforcement. And it's the Pacific's implementation of, in particular, Chapter 3. And I highlight this one because I think you would be very interested in it. And underneath that, some of the key areas that have been identified are some of the key challenges we're seeing now with COVID-19. So, for example, we can clearly see that when it comes to whistleblower protection, this is not concretely covered. When it comes to even bribery in the private sector, it is not adequately criminalized across the Pacific. There are a number of countries that have it, but not all. Fiji, Palau, Solomon Islands have it. Others do too, but not all. Then, of course, when we look now at prevention, what we know is there are a lot of recommendations coming out in relation to public procurement. We also know that there are a lot of recommendations when it comes to right to information, freedom of information. And this aligns with a lot of the work that we're doing otherwise. And Sonia will get to this in a moment. But the information is that in the Pacific currently, if we only take right to information as an example, we have the Cook Islands, we have Palau, and we have Vanuatu that have formally adopted right to information laws. Fiji has one, but it's not yet enforced. And we do know of another 7 that are trying to adopt these right to information laws in the future. Some of them we're working with at the moment, and some of them have policies in place and have taken certain steps. But I think to concretely enact that, a lot more needs to be done. We also mentioned Sustainable Development Goal number 16. In terms of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, this is an anchor for many of you. And this is why we at UNPRAC are trying to accelerate the progress of the SDGs, but mainly through number 16. So that's really dedicated to promoting the peaceful, inclusive societies, access to justice for all, and building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. There's a lot around it. There are many indicators, many targets, but key for us is that SDG 16 is an enabling and a transformative goal, as well as an end goal in and of itself. We argue that you can't achieve any of the others unless you achieve this one. And in this regard, there are many different targets that we're trying to look at and that you as countries are trying to look at, and we're trying to support you to look at. And this is reducing corruption, bribery in all its forms, developing those effective, accountable, and transparent institutions. But beyond that, what we're here looking at is the promotion of the rule of law, reducing illicit and arms flows, also looking at inclusive and participatory representative decision making, and also public access to information, as I mentioned before, is crucial. So what do we currently have in the Pacific? And so here in the Pacific, in terms of regional frameworks, we all know, and I know that many of you have been involved in, also the Forum 8 Principles of Accountability, the Bikitawa Declaration, the Pacific Regionalism, the Bow Declaration, which also specifically looks at corruption and the action plan underneath it. But now what we also have is the Tueni Vision. And this one came out of a February conference that some of you also attended. And it was spearheaded by the president of Kiribati. There was a lot of information that was published around it. And I wish to also thank the PILON Secretariat for sharing a lot of this information with you. Thank you. And what came out was really this vision. And the name in and of itself, I think, is very telling, where I means sail and wa means canoe. And so the concept, even just behind the sail and the name Taniwa, really talks about and symbolizes a sailing canoe in the vast Pacific Ocean that separates and makes our individual countries isolated, but at the same time unites us. We recognize there to be a long journey that the sailing canoe needs to go on. And in the open waters, there's often both tranquility and stormy weather. And this is what is to be expected when we try to prevent and fight corruption. So this was the analogy given as to why it became what it is. And at the moment, it's gone before the FOC. The leaders are going to talk about it at PIFs. And so I think hopefully it may become something that we can use as a bit of a starting point to really have this regional vision going forwards. Now, while we have to say that even in normal circumstances, and as the chair mentioned, corruption poses this major impediment to human, economic, and security development. Now, it's exacerbated, frankly, through COVID-19, and the lack of sufficient accountability and oversight mechanisms in response and recovery means that the risk of corruption can significantly increase. We're seeing this, and it can have a critical socioeconomic impact. Now, we produced this advisory note. It goes into it in detail. There is a lot of information out there about COVID-19 corruption, be it by UNODC, UNDP, the World Bank, the IMF, Transparency International. Many counterparts have written about it. But one thing that really is on everybody's minds at the moment is this vaccine. And this is why I'd like to quickly talk about this vaccine and the corruption risks that we should be talking about now in relation to that. So 90% there in terms of an effective vaccine. What does that mean? So assuming that we do have this safe and effective vaccine, then the deployment of it globally will be unprecedented in terms of scale and complexity. And as we know, WHO is talking a lot about it. How will it be rolled out? Who will have preference? A lot of questions and concerns around it, and rightly so. Now, the allocation and the distribution of this vaccine presents a number of corruption risks. And they are really vital to yours, to mine, to everybody's public health goals. And these risks include substandard, falsified vaccines, unsecure storage and distribution systems, leakages in funding designated for the development and distribution of the vaccines, nepotism, favoritism in the distribution, allocation prioritization of the vaccines, and then, of course, corrupted procurement systems. And I mentioned previously that what we've seen through the UNPRAC reviews is that there are a lot of recommendations already in place in relation to the procurement systems that we have. So therefore, it is a little bit of a red flag to say we don't have systems already in place prior to COVID that match the international standards. So how are we going to cope once we're rolling out this vaccine? So these corruption risks should be identified and mitigated to help advance the equitable access really of this safe and effective vaccine to everybody. This is why it is a priority right now. One thing that we did is that we were concerned about what kind of oversight mechanisms for economic relief, rescue, and stimulus measures were countries taking to fight against the impact of COVID-19. Now, we sent this survey out across the Pacific, and we asked a number of different questions to really understand what are these emergency packages and what are some of the corruption risks associated with them. And in this regard, we got 14 Pacific Island countries responding, and I wish to thank many of you who were some of those respondents. And because we had such, we were actually overwhelmed, frankly, by how many people responded to the questionnaire. But now we have a concrete understanding from the respondents as to what these packages are and what it concretely means. Now, we had hoped to share this analysis with you today, as well as additional information, because a lot of the information needs to be verified and cross-checked and so on and so forth. And we're going to produce a detailed publication for you. The consultant we had hired, very unfortunately, contracted COVID-19, had to go to the ICU. He's okay, thankfully, but we had to rehire, and we now have a new consultant on board. So we hope to be able to share this publication, which I know many of you are interested in, hopefully in early 2021. But some of the initial findings that I would like to share with you, and if it's okay, a big disclaimer, because what I'm going to share with you are some of the responses to the survey from the 14 Pacific Island countries. But in that, of course, we need to verify the information, it needs to be cross-checked, and so on and so forth. So please don't take it as black and white. It will still need to be updated. But what was interesting is that 13 Pacific Island countries have introduced an economic relief, rescue, or stimulus package, with the 14th Pacific Island country saying while there was no plan in place at the moment, they were wishing to introduce one, but they still didn't have a confirmed COVID-19 case. Now, a lot of the countries noted that the reforms that were being pushed out very quickly, a lot to do with cash payments, grants, tax rebates, and these things. Now, only 3 respondents, so 2 Pacific Island countries, clearly knew that specific safeguards, so policies and regulations, had been put in place to prevent fraud and corruption in the distribution of these funds. 1 respondent also provided that a specialized oversight anti-corruption agency had been consulted on the safeguards to be put in place on the
Annika?
risks. Yes,
Annika,
Chair.
can you hear me?
Yes, Chair.
Annika?
Yes,
Can you hear
Chair.
me? Yes. Because of time, are
Yes.
you able to wind up? Or how much more time?
So sorry, Chair. I will quickly wind up this slide and pass it to my colleague Sonia. Is that okay, Chair?
Yes, please. That would be fantastic.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So basically, just to say that there's a lot of information here. I think it'll be very important to counterparts, because it really does talk about what the different measures have been, who has done what, to what extent also civil society has been involved, to what extent the information has been made public, access has been provided, and so on and so forth. There are also a number of recommendations that we would recommend to countries to have a quick look at. So in our particular info note, I just wanted to highlight that there are a number of key recommendations that we would love to highlight to many of you. So if you had the time to go through it, Sonia and I are also available to answer any of these questions, because it's really key to look at how you can cooperate between government agencies, work with the private sector, business integrity, youth empowerment, protecting human rights, and then of course really that how do you get the information out, managing illicit financial flows, transparency when it comes to beneficiaries and recipients of COVID-19 funds, also distribution of that, comprehensive auditing, oversight, accountability, then using technology where possible, procurement practices, ensuring product compliance, and then of course, the emergency legislation. So there's a lot out there. I won't go into any more detail because Sonia, over to you. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you, Annika. Thank you, PILON members. Thank you all to all participants for the invitation and for the opportunity for Annika and myself to share a little bit of our experience and our lessons learned and our knowledge with you. And we do hope that this will be a beginning of a long friendship and we will continue having similar exchanges. Having said that, perhaps I will just very briefly give an overview of what UNPRAC has been doing to address some of the COVID-19 challenges. And perhaps I will just very briefly introduce UNPRAC. Annika mentioned that this is a joint UNODC and UNDP project. It is important for us to know that the assumptions underlying this project are that corruption obliterates people's faith in governance. It can enable a small elite of people in positions of power to prosper, while others pay the price, seriously damaging the relationship between the state and its people. Another assumption that we hold is that corruption can corrode public faith in institutions. It is also a proven thief of economic development and of social development as well. And the rule we know is that the more corrupt the society, the poorer the people. So with this in mind, and with the conventions that and international frameworks that Annika referred to, which are really guiding and framing our work, and that is the Ankara Convention and the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, we have formulated this program to promote and strengthen measures to prevent and fight corruption in the Pacific more efficiently and more effectively. So we are focusing on measures and activities to promote effective, transparent and accountable governments, but also to bring closer to the institutions and to the population the benefits of preventing and fight corruption, for creating better environment for trade, better environment for business, better environment for investment, and overall sustainable development for societies. So we know that the funds lost to corruption are really very serious, and sometimes they're really 10 times, and globally, in fact, it is a figure that is being shared, is that it's 10 times the total sum of foreign aid. So this causes a lot of obstructions globally, but there are also not obstructions for the Pacific, and they do inflict real and direct harm on families and communities. COVID-19 presented additional challenges, additional unprecedented challenges to the challenges that we already had in terms of corruption risks in the Pacific. And we all know that, and it's some of them were perhaps evident, some are more hidden, some old corruption risks or non-corruption risks got worse. But at the same time, within our team, we wanted to believe that COVID-19 also created transformative opportunities for us as a team to remain relevant and to seek additional opportunities, how we can continue working with the public sector, with the private sector, with civil society, to raise to the occasion, and for us together to reinforce this commitment to fight corruption. It's not easy, it's difficult, it's much more difficult than it may sound, but we decided to focus really on to take a two-pronged approach. The approach is that we still want to remain relevant in terms of our systematic long-term efforts in the Pacific. We have been here since 2012 as a project. We have grown a lot since then. So we really believe that we should retain this systemic long-term focus and the long-term vision where we want to go, where we are at the moment, where we were in the past. However, we were looking to identify what additional corruption risks were created, what are the critical issues, which are the most affected actors, and where are the windows of opportunity for us to be relevant, to be quick, to adjust, so that we address some of the challenges of corruption, also related to COVID-19 or appearing because of COVID-19. And Annika mentioned some of those that are, of course, reflected in the advisory note. And it would be great if you could also consult the note where we provide some analysis and some recommendations. I will just mention a few areas where we specifically focused in the recent months, particularly in the months following the eruption of the pandemic. One area of focus, of specific focus for us was the area of access to information and the right to information. This is an area which has been in our interest for a long time, so it's not the first time for us to become aware that this is an important issue. However, we thought that COVID-19 and our analysis, careful analysis, showed that there are risks for this right to be neglected, and also for in terms of, and it is one of the human rights also reflected in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the relevance of this human right is at multiple levels, so not only in terms of its corruption lens, but also there are other layers of relevance that are also equally important. So with this in mind, we really went into concrete action and started brokering exchange of knowledge among the Pacific countries. Specifically, we, for example, supported Micronesia and PNG with webinars where we facilitated partnerships with the Australian Information Commissioner and the New Zealand Ombudsman, and also involved the Right to Information Unit of Vanuatu to share some of the knowledge and experience on establishing right to information regimes with FSM and PNG. And we were really impressed by the interest, and we will continue following up, but this was something that we managed to do promptly, and also to reflect together with these institutions on the implications of COVID-19 on exercise of the right to information in the Pacific. Be it formalized in national legislation or not, it is a universal human right, and it is our responsibility to promote this right also through the lens of access to information, because the less access to information, more opportunities for corruption as well. So this is one of the areas that I wanted to focus on. The second one is our analysis also show that COVID-19 has presented enormous challenges for the small and large businesses worldwide and in the Pacific as well. So business sector has been in our focus in the recent months. Various reports have suggested hindrances for activities of the companies, including supply chains interruptions, cash flows problems, inability to deliver. So a lot of additional opportunities for corruption, in addition to what was already there as a risk. So increased risk aversion in financial market, decreased business confidence, etc. So these factors have significantly affecting enterprises and the supply chains as well. So to address this concern, we have intensified our work with the business sector. And again, I would like to reiterate that business sector is not a new partner for us. We have been working with business sector for a long time, and perhaps this long partnership gave us a comparative advantage, so to speak, because we could kind of continue our dialogue with the business sector and make them aware of the COVID-19 implications, and help them understand how they can protect themselves and how they can even identify corruption risks and report corruption. Because business sector is on the both sides of the coin, right? Sometimes it's victim of corruption, but it can also contribute to corruption. So we've continued with our code of conduct trainings, for example, and we managed to cover a lot of sectors. For example, in Fiji only, we worked with tourism sector, agriculture, transport, hospitality, and these are the sectors that have been really significantly affected by the crisis. A third aspect of our work was for us to understand which actors, which targets groups need more attention. Where we should focus at the moment. So our analysis showed that we need to focus more on youth and women. These groups again have been part and parcel of our work. They have been our partners for a long time, but COVID-19 simply made us think more about how we can improve this partnership and how we can help them bridge this period of crisis in many different respects. So we focused on promoting business integrity among youth entrepreneurs. For example, at the moment, we are organizing workshops in Fiji, Solomon Islands, upcoming workshops in Samoa and Palau, around promoting business integrity among youth by also forging institutional partnerships to address the corruption risk. So again, we cannot focus only on working with business youth, because corruption is complex phenomenon, and there are a lot of layers in the story and in the partnerships that need to be taken into account. So involving relevant ministries, other sectors, civil society, anti-corruption institutions, as well as Ministry of Commerce and Trade, for example, is institution responsible for providing services to businesses was critical. Another focus area, as Annika mentioned, was procurement. Of course, it's an evident, obvious area where corruption risk can be identified, and it's a very critical area. So this is a specific aspect of our attention, and we already mentioned that. But in addition to that, we are linking these processes and this work with sector with how public institutions are reporting to the public on what they do, how they do, what they do in relation to COVID-19, but even more broadly. So we are, for example,
Sonia.
Yeah.
Sonia.
Yes.
Yeah, you have to wind up now for the question and answer session.
Yes, and then just perhaps the last sentence that also focus on women, as I mentioned, women is in businesses in specifically is has been our focus of attention. And finally, I will just conclude by saying that we have learned that we need to forge interinstitutional partnerships. We need to forge collective action in the COVID-19, especially in relation to working with groups that are at least at risk to be left behind. And it is more crucial than ever now to strengthen our efforts and relationships with the countries in the Pacific towards meeting the current and emerging corruption risks, and also just seizing the opportunities for us to be better. Thank you very much. Over.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Sonia and Annika, thank you very much for that. Martha, could you assist with the questions?
Thank you, Chair. I would encourage the attendees to put any questions they would like into the Zoom chat. I have received some anonymous questions I'm happy to transmit. One is for either of the panelists around whistleblower protections. Do you expect whistleblower protections to become even more important in the wake of potential breaches of procurement or funds disbursement with regard to COVID-19 responses? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a crucial one, and I'm so grateful that it was asked. This is actually a partnership that we are doing with PILON, so we're very, very proud of it, actually. We are just about to hire somebody to come on board to look at exactly this point. And it's something that we've been talking to Martha about, also to very much draw on your guide that you've produced going forwards. And then we'll be reaching out to countries to see who would specifically like to focus on whistleblower protection, also in relation to COVID-19. And the reason is that this consultant will be able to work also specifically with you if you would like on your law to do a training. So this is a resource that we would like to offer to you. And we're very happy. I was hoping to be able to share the name with Martha soon, but not quite at that stage yet, but soon. So yes, it is crucial, and it is something that is not only being wanted by many of you, but it really is now a huge priority. And as we can see from the recommendations, it's not being addressed. Thank you.
Sonia, did you want to add to that response?
No, just also appreciation for the question. It's very, very important and critical because we understand that it's very sensitive issues, and clear policies and mechanisms and tools should be put in place in order for whistleblower protection to work. It really requires very, very careful analysis and anticipation of the potential challenges for the institutions and for the overall system. And it's also something that should, based on the experiences from other countries in the world, should not be really rushed into. It requires a careful analysis, but once it is rolled out, the population should be confident that this will work, because we just don't want another piece of paper and a law on paper not to be implementable. So, thanks for the question. And as Annika mentioned, we will do our best to support this going forward, and we do hope that we will continue our cooperation with PILON on this issue. Thank you.
Chair, we have another question from the floor, which is to ask the panelists to elaborate a bit more on the Fiji Project, which had the motto, "I don't accept bribes." Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, perhaps I can just briefly mention that this is again fully aligned with our ongoing work with the Fijian authorities, the Fiji Anti-Corruption Commission, but also other institutions in Fiji, because this campaign, or rather movement, we hope that it will become, will be horizontal one, really to be implemented across all public service institutions. It will be led by the Fiji Anti-Corruption Commission, which holds the mandate. But the effort will be horizontal in terms of integrating anti-corruption knowledge across public service, and public servants are the ones really interacting with the citizens, providing service delivery, and they are the points of where corruption opportunities and risk emerge. And of course, it's not always by design. Sometimes there is lack of knowledge by civil servants as to what they should do and they should not do. So this will also involve debate, dialogue, and training for the public service in terms of anti-corruption legislation, reporting mechanisms, including, because reporting is also part of whistleblowing, right? It's just whistleblowing is can be formal, can be less formal, you can be anonymous, it depends how it's regulated. But reporting corruption is part of this awareness that it's also that people also have responsibility to not to engage in the corruption, and if they witness corruption or are victims of corruption, that it is their responsibility to report. And civil service servants are really one of the most important part of our efforts, and their knowledge and will really make a difference. So this is upcoming. It may be a little bit of surprise. We are still working on it. So it will be launched on the 9th of December. We hope you will follow it and perhaps support us in the implementation of the next steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Do we have time
Thank
for
you,
one more question?
Martha. Yeah, we do have.
Excellent. In the survey results that UNPRAC is yet to formally release, I believe there was a limited number of countries that reported that specific policies and regulations had been put in place to prevent fraud and corruption in the disbursement of COVID relief funds. I wondered if you have a specific example that you could share of this type of safeguard that reflects best practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I should add that in the survey, it's a train of questions in order to be able to really distill what it means. So in terms of the different safeguards, there indeed was a country. So this is where, for example, one country was talking about how they not only were engaged in terms of what might be some of the risks, who receives the funds, what are the packages, how is it going to be dispersed, also looking at the different budget, in relation to safeguards, how publicly available is it, and to what extent have citizens been able to be part of the process in deciding what they should be? So what is that package? In some countries did report that actually there was a lot of official publications, a lot of national TV, radio was used, news websites, but also social media came up a lot as one way to be able to really connect with citizens in order to be able to ensure that they too are part of it. Now, in terms of civil society overseeing the implementation of the funds, either there was a I don't know or there was a no, but there was one particular case where even civil society was overseeing the implementation of the funds. So it'll be interesting to know a little bit more about that. In terms of special feedback mechanisms, so for example, in the disbursement of the funds, is there some mechanism whereby you can actually report, listen, I've seen, fraud take place here. How do you go about it? Some countries said, yes, there are. A number said actually that, yes, we do have specific mechanisms in place to report it, which is good practice. Then have there been complaints received already. Yes, there had also been some complaints received. So I think that to really, I hope, Martha, I've answered your question, but there are a number of different ways that countries have gone about it or done it, and some of them are good practice that we do hope to highlight in the publication.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Annika and Sonia. Thank you so much for that. Martha, is there any question that may only attract a very brief response from the two presenters?
We do have one comment that the discussion has mostly been focused on South Pacific and not North Pacific, apart from Palau. I wondered if either of the panelists would like to make any comments on that.
We are, okay, maybe I can just very briefly say that we are covering 15 countries. We are covering the North Pacific as well. There are some activities that are perhaps focus more on the South Pacific for a number of reasons. Some of our really activities are needs-based or demand-based. So we are approached by governments, and there are some governments are proactive and clearer in their vision, right? In the steps they want to take. So we are ready to always support. So there is no geographic preference for us. We are equally available, even for countries that sometimes are even beyond the scope of our project. We are always open for advice, for cooperation. If we cannot personally advise or support, then we forge partnerships or connect people and countries, bring knowledge from different countries. So if there is an issue or a question or something specific that you have in mind, please approach us and we will consider it, and we will do our best to provide support. But otherwise, we are covering the 15 countries. Yes, thank you.
And maybe if I might just be able to add, Chair and Martha, to what Sonia was saying. So in particular now during COVID-19 in the North Pacific, so Sonia had mentioned FSM in terms of the right to information. So this is where we did have a look at the legislation, but we also looked at whistleblower legislation recently in FSM. So looking in terms of, you know, what is good practice, and they're wanting to somebody, I think we have somebody from FSM also could update us, you know, in terms of taking it to Congress. And in terms of the Marshall Islands, the focus there at the moment is more on anti-money laundering. And this is also now a focus of FSM. So I guess different priority areas. And as Sonia said, the needs are different based on what, you know, specifically you're wishing to prioritize. One thing we also did with FSM this year is a national anti-corruption strategy. So we worked very closely with the government, but not only the government, but a range of different stakeholders. And so FSM now has this draft strategy, which is a whole of government and a whole of society approach. So private sector was included, youth, women's groups, and that's fantastic because it's a good practice to be able to really holistically look at how are we going to prevent and tackle this. So no, as Sonia mentioned, we try to be very focused across all the countries, but we are needs-based. So if there is something, please do feel free to reach out to us directly or even through PILON. Thank you.
Annika and Sonia, your response to that question have just set us so well as we wind up this session. As you, Annika, pointed out at the beginning of your presentation, if we are to go far, we have to go together. And that clearly illustrates the importance of our unity, of our network as a pylon. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for your very enlightening presentations, and also for Blake for making it more illustrative. We thank our pylon partner, the UN Regional Anti-Corruption Project, and everyone who is watching today. All attendees at 2 days question and answer will be asked to complete an anonymous feedback survey to help shape future pylon events. You will find the recording and a summary poster of this event on the PILON website shortly. We encourage you to visit the PILON website to view other corruption-related resources that we have developed. And most recently, this includes the Prosecuting Corruption Toolkit, which outlines PILON countries' legal frameworks relating to corruption and their practical experiences prosecuting corruption, and the guiding principles for protecting whistleblowers and encouraging protected disclosures. With that, Annika and Sonia, the host, and the participants, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you well, all the best from the Central Pacific here in the Republic of Nauru. Good afternoon.